listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Welcome to Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a podcast hosted by the Conference Board's Global Sustainability Center. I'm your host, Claudia Lee. I'll be talking to leaders of global corporates and startup founders about how they integrate business and sustainability. It may be challenging, but these companies show that it is definitely feasible. Now, let's talk sustainable business. Today, I will be sitting down with Ruth Andrade, Earth Care Strategy Lead at Lush Cosmetics, UK. As her title suggests, her role involves leading projects and building networks that honor Lush's motto, to leave the world lusher than we found it. Witnessing the environmental destruction in her native country, Brazil, was what first drew Ruth to a career in environmental impact. Ruth initially joined Lush as an environmental development manager. She then moved on to study a master's in advanced environmental and energy studies and also co founded Alliance, a collective of practitioners bringing regenerative design to the humanitarian sector. Now, she's back at Lush to continue her mission of regenerating and protecting natural capital. Hi, Ruth. Welcome to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. So, your role at Lush is very interesting. It's called Earth Care Strategy Lead. So, I'd like to start off by hearing all about what you do at Lush.
Sure. Yeah, I think my role titles. I keep making different things up because I'm not really super keen on hierarchy, and I like that the role reflects a little bit, what I'm actually doing, which for me is to support the development of strategy around caring for the earth. And we use that term, earth care, rather than sustainability in our teams to also make sure that we're constantly reminding ourselves like who our main stakeholder is. Um, yeah, and I think I like to say that like I'm an activist for the planet that happens to work in business, and I help develop strategies to leave the world lusher than we found it. And our team, as a collective, I think our strategy is to have people really embedded in different departments in the business. So we're helping, the whole of Lush like reduce our impact on the environment and go beyond that and actually drive us towards positive impact. So we're working with waste, energy, water, materials, but also the very important work of engaging staff and bringing people along with us in this journey. So, and I lead that team. Yeah. And then we also work closely with the buying team, which is our supply chain impact team. We have a few working groups together within Lush where we're working together on shared aims. For example, measuring impact is something that we do together. And then I also get involved into a lot of our giving strategies because I think Lush has a very big giving strategy. We have given nearly 70 million pounds in the last 15 years. And I'm also connected to funding regenerative projects through some of our giving strategies. So yeah, it's a very wide role. It's really exciting to do what I do.
Yeah, it sounds amazing, and it sounds like you're so passionate about it. So I want to zoom in on two things you just mentioned, including the giving strategy as well as regenerative impact. So first, can you tell me a bit more about what the giving strategy encompasses?
Sure. I think we have two main giving strategies at Lush. One, it's really focused on funding grassroots campaigning and activism. So we fund across human rights, animal rights, and the environment. And we fund the people that are aiming to change root causes, usually very small charities, volunteering groups, people that are really what we call on the front lines of the work and doing the change and campaigning for change. And then another track of our funding is to fund the people that are really building positive alternatives through regenerative principles. So we have a prize called Spring Prize that is coming now in May, and we award projects that are working across social and ecological regeneration. And then we also have a fund called Refund, the Regenerative Fund, that is also funding, we always fund grassroots, but grassroots groups that are doing community-led regeneration in different landscapes.
Hmm. Wow, that's incredible. I love that you focus on grassroots groups and communities because I think those people are the ones who are on the ground doing the actual work, but most often they're also the ones who don't have enough funding. So I think it's very essential to give them enough support. So let's talk about regenerative impact, or what the word regenerative itself means, because now I feel it's quite overused, and people throw it around quite often. So can you tell me, to yourself or to Lush, how you define it?
Yeah, I definitely, this is a moment where there are so many definitions going around and people doing their own interpretations of regeneration. Um, like the way I like to frame it is really looking at the current paradigm that we are in such an extractive economic paradigm, and we have evolved our businesses and evolved our communities and evolved the economies by really taking more value out of the earth and the earth systems than the earth's capacity to regenerate, or even indeed communities capacity to regenerate, or even employees and staff capacity to regenerate. So we're seeing not only environmental degradation, but we're also seeing, massive rates of burnout. We're seeing increased wealth disparity. And for me, one of the most important facts is that we are undermining future generations' capacity to also survive and thrive on the planet, right? So we're borrowing from the future through this extractive mentality. And then how do we look at all of these issues through another paradigm or another lens? And that for me is where the idea of regeneration, regenerative impact, or a regenerative paradigm come from, is how do we continue increasing our capacity to create diverse, complex life on the planet, and making sure that in future generations we're also leaving a planet for future generations of all species that can actually hold the evolution of life, right? So we say creating more conditions for life, generating surplus, having an impact, a positive impact in all the systems that we interact with. So thinking as a business, we can think, how can we have a regenerative influence, right? Or actually, I don't like using the word influence, but how can we create conditions for our suppliers to be regenerating their ecosystems? How do we conditions in our customers to be also regenerating their skins and their mental health? How do we create conditions in our staff to also be looking to that, that same direction? So I think it's that holistic look into all the systems that we connect, and how instead of extracting, we create regenerative relationships where we're really supporting this unfolding. Yeah, I hope that's not like too, how can I say, too theoretical. I can give lots of really real life concrete examples of what is that, what we are actually doing. Yeah.
No, not at all. It's not too theoretical. I think it's very, you explained it so well. And you put it so well about how a lot of businesses, and unfortunately most businesses still, are very extractive, and they're focusing more on profit than thinking about how we're destroying environments and communities, and also not thinking in the long term for future generations. So what you do at Lush is very noble, and it's also very inspiring. And I know that Lush's business model is very much based on this idea of regenerative impact. But even though it's very inspiring, I know it's a huge challenge and a huge project to take on. uh, let How do you break that down to make sure, say, you work with suppliers that are regenerative, and then also you source materials that are regenerative, and also you bring that throughout the supply chain to also make sure that any waste that the consumers create are also recycled and reused. Can we break that down a little bit, and then maybe explain how you do that in each part of the supply chain?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's always keeping that question in mind. Do we have a right to exist as a business? Like, are we really contributing, our forests and oceans cleaner because we're here? Are there, is there more wildlife and diversity because Lush exists? And then breaking that down into how do we make decisions within the business that are driving towards, this larger aims? And then I think some of the biggest, like, if you look at any cosmetics company, the biggest impact by far is in the supply chain, right? There is no comparison. And we have done like a deep dive to understand what the impacts and the opportunities are in our supply chain, and then looking at how do we move from this extractive mindset into a regenerative mindset. So agricultural materials, for example, right? So most cosmetics industry are using a lot of agricultural materials, both in natural and synthetic raw materials. And the way agricultural materials are produced is pretty much by mining the soil for nutrients. And then we're using fossil fuel derived agrochemicals like fertilizers as a replacement for this soil nutrient. And we are like working against life constantly. Like we're constantly killing the health of the soil with pesticides or practices like tilling. And then we say, right, there is a different way. So, how do we work with our suppliers? And we also have developed our own projects where we're looking into soil health and we're looking into how can we produce beyond organic agriculture? How can we produce in a way that we're actually bringing life back into the soil? And one of the projects that I always like to mention was one of the first projects that we started working with in 2010. It was a project in Ghana. Ghana is a country with a lot of land degradation. Like, everywhere else on the planet, there is a lot of land degradation. There are even statistics that say that up to 40% of the total land area of the planet has been degraded. So there is also the opportunity for our supply chains to regenerate. And in Ghana, we were working with a permaculture center called GPI, Ghana Permaculture Institute. And we knew them from our networks of grassroots groups, and they were producing moringa for their own communities. They were actually making cosmetics, local cosmetics like soap with moringa powder and moringa oil. And we worked with them on training other farmers and increasing the production of moringa oil. And what you have is then a project that has 13 micro enterprises with an area that is producing moringa, but also lots of other crops because they're using an agroforestry system or a polyculture system where you're really using one plant with another plant to support each other, support the soil. And then you could see that the farm next door was a monoculture pineapple with exposed soil onto the sun. That that pineapple is being produced because we're bringing fertility and pest management from outside of the land. So through regeneration, we're using, what I'm producing on the land, sunlight, water. I'm holding water in the soil, and through that work, we actually increase the total amount of life that place can sustain. And then we can buy the moringa oil. But there is also moringa leaf for local nutrition. There is also, the empowerment of local farmers towards self-determination. There are all these other benefits that come when we look at it, more than I need to get agriculture materials from
Mhm.
this piece of land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I also am very passionate about polyculture, permaculture projects, because I know that it really helps to diversify like agricultural workers' income because they don't no longer need to only be selling one type of crop, which is what I believe monoculture is. They can then sell, apart from moringa, like you said, other crops, other fruits, and it uplifts them as a society, as a community as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering whether, how do you find out about these farmers? Like, do you and your team actually go travel around the world to source these people, or do you contact people on the ground to contact these farmers?
I think at the beginning, because we are quite embedded also through our giving and by employing activists, like me and other people that we employ at Lush, we are connected to a lot of those grassroots organizations and the networks that exist on agroecology and permaculture and eco villages, and there are all these networks that are there. So I think it was tapping a lot into the projects that were already part of those networks. And I think at the beginning, our decision was to start with people who had already understood that there was a different way of managing land, and then support with financing, like supported with actual unrecoverable grants, the development of their capacity. So, for example, can they open a new permaculture center or farmer training center? Can we support them with processing equipment, etc. And then over time, as we learned also from a lot of mistakes, we started working with larger, more commercial suppliers. So can we, then scale this a bit and be influencing our existing suppliers? Um, and yeah, and then but still using this network, especially for if we need consultancy or if we need a specific type of training. So it's important for us to be around those networks. But we do indeed visit. So um, we developed an interesting strategy. We looked where all of our materials were coming from and realized that, of course, like a lot of cosmetics company, materials are coming from high biodiversity habitats and areas that are actually very important to preserve. And the cosmetic supply chain is a great opportunity to actually help preserve these lands because we can work with non timber forest products. We can support communities that are on the buffer zone of really huge carbon sinks or huge biodiversity habitats because we can work to develop those projects, develop those livelihoods projects. And we have people that actually look after different sourcing hubs. We call them sourcing hubs. So we have someone looking to a sourcing hub in Indonesia and East Asia, someone looking at a sourcing hub in the Mediterranean, in Africa, in Latin America. And those are the people that are always scouting for opportunities, projects, partnerships, collaboration, and understanding what's happening across those landscapes.
Got it. Wow, that's it's such an amazing ecosystem of people and earth activists that come together to create this regenerative value chain. But I think a question that maybe other listeners or corporates would probably be interested in is sourcing from permaculture farms like this compared to a larger commercial farm. Would it be more expensive and much more difficult to arrange? Because unfortunately, most businesses still prioritize convenience and profit over things like what Lush does.
Oh yeah, for sure. So it's I think we do see some economies when we source direct rather through distributors. So I think that's one way to see this. But another is that a lot of it was upfront investment from Lush that we probably would never recover. But we also understand now, like we were doing this stuff 10, 13 years ago, right? When that wasn't even language to describe what we were doing. Now, I think there are so many more opportunities when you start looking at blended finance models. So the money for this doesn't all have to come from the corporate sector. This is also a form of development. This is a new way of doing development. So it's important to also partner with development, like multilateral, bilateral organizations, country level development agencies, the private sector, philanthropy. So, in these models of what we call blended finance. So, I think we have a bigger opportunity now to be testing other financial models that are also um, bringing value to the social impacts and to the biodiversity impacts and to the carbon impacts and to the water impacts, and bringing that more into your financial structure. I think that's one way to do this. And another is that to tie this with risk management. So we also know that land degradation and climate change represent a huge risk for our supply chains. So, if you have enormous monoculture crops, there is so little resilience in that system. So we also need to see these projects and not just, oh, we're trying to do nice things with, this community here, but rather we're also trying to ensure the resilience, the future resilience of the supply chain. And then when you start adding those elements as well, we are actually de-risking, the future supply chain. And then again, it makes it more worthwhile, even within a current economic paradigm, to be investing at scale. But there is a lot of learning that needs to be done. And we are seeing already some larger organizations with bigger projects that are working to agroforestry coffee, agroforestry palm, yeah, at larger scale than just a permaculture farm with 1,000 farmers. We're talking about 100,000 farmers.
Wow. It's so good to hear that corporates as well as governments are now so much more open to agroforestry as well as building a regenerative supply chain. And I love what you mentioned about blended finance. I think that's a new like an additional option for people who really want to build a supply chain that is more sustainable but are lacking some sort of investment. And I think by blended finance, you're talking about you refer to not just UK but around the world. There are many opportunities like this, right?
So, for example, we are connected to something called the Amazon Investors Coalition, and they're building 20 cases for blended finance. And if you work in philanthropy, for example, you're also trying to fund ways to protect the Amazon, it's much more beneficial for the money to go into a community and a project where that's going to have some longevity or some resilience into the future, and developing alternative livelihoods to deforestation or to poaching or to forest degradation is one of the key ways to end deforestation. So, why not use some philanthropic money to support the development of supply chains, right? That then you can have the private sector come in as buyers. So there is a lot of those conversations, and those examples are beginning, to arise. But at Lush, we've always done everything. We did the philanthropic part, and we also did, the financial part. But I think it was because we were really early adopters, and now we need to embed this into more robust financial models.
That's why I'm such a big fan of Lush, because I know you guys were early adopters and the founders are so visionary. So, talking about the learning curve, which you just mentioned, there was a big learning curve. Can you name maybe a few key challenges you faced while trying to build or continuing to build this regenerative value chain?
Yeah. I think it's also important to know that we are far from being able to say that we have a fully regenerative value chain, but it's work in progress, and we are quite diligent to make sure we're always evolving. I think I think one of the challenges is just the sheer amount of materials that we use. So the one positive aspect is that we are using over 300 species of plants in our supply chain. So that gives us an advantage, because then, it really makes sense to be doing polycultures when we're buying such a huge variety, that we can buy things from different landscapes and support different projects because of the flexibility that we have in using different materials, especially great for our non-timber forest products, like materials coming from forests, regeneratively, etc. But that also is a challenge, because for a lot of those materials, we're such a small portion of the demand in the global market that we don't really have a significant buying power to try to influence. Others we do. So, we have also been able to focus on them. And I think another challenge is really to understand what regenerative looks like in different materials, in different regions. The whole, part of the principle of regeneration is that it's not a cookie cutter, or it's not a best practice approach, or it's not oh, we have a model here and we just scale that model. It's really dependent on context, the landscape, the community. So you really have to look at it from the existing context and existing situation, and share and have like a shared understanding with farmers and with your suppliers of what regeneration could look like. And then to understand, like, there was very useful work that we did with Terra Genesis International in the US. There are consultants working with regenerative supply chains, and others also based on the work of Carol Sanford, which is to create a regenerative continuum. So if we say that one end is degenerative and extractive, and the other is regenerative, and if we understand what the pathway looks like, then we can make sure that we're always moving. So even if we're not perfect, we're always taking the next step towards this shared understanding. So I think developing that kind of an alignment and vision also takes time. And as I said, like the investment that I shared before, I think at the beginning we invested quite a lot into testing some of these ideas, developing some of those ideas, and um, and also trying to find the right balance between the environmental and the social impact. Things like land ownership. Do we own land? Do we is neocolonization if we're owning land? How do we bring things like climate justice, equity, reparation, reconciliation into this work, right? So I think some of that, what does sharing of benefit really looks like in some of those projects, and yeah, those are all deep questions that also give integrity to what we're doing, but also create, challenges.
Absolutely. I like the term regenerative continuum. I've never heard anybody else say that before, but I agree that it's definitely a continuum. And with every single type of product or raw material, there is a different way of what, like, there's a different meaning of regenerative. So the learning curve is still huge, but it's a continuum. And I think it's good to see businesses like Lush really, really putting so many resources into it and really pushing yourselves further every single day to become regenerative. So we're almost done with the first part, but I'd like to end with maybe a few pieces of your advice as Lush's Earth Care strategy lead for businesses starting out who are pretty overwhelmed about how to start building a regenerative value chain. What should they do first?
Yeah, I think it's to understand really what's the essence of the business, and we're all occupying different niches, right, within the business sector, and connecting to different consumers. So what is the best gift that you can give, or what is the best contribution that you can make that really aligns to the founding energy and the essence of your business? And then I think really moving from a mindset of, oh, let's take small steps, or small steps add up, and go fully for where are we having the biggest impact at the moment, the biggest negative impact, and where do we have the biggest potential for creating, regeneration, or for protecting, restoring, regenerating ecosystems and communities. And look at those two things, and design experiments, and design projects that are there for you to learn, for the whole business to learn, and learn through firsthand experience. So start with what I say, like, feel high integrity projects, design projects, learn from them, involve people like your buyers, your designers, your inventors, your production managers, so they learn by doing, and really bring everyone on this journey of what regeneration can look like for your business, because it's always going to be context dependent. So that's it. There is no handbook on how to do this. It has to be done by reflection and trial and learning. Yeah, and find out more, right? Really take a course. There is quite a few books on regenerative leadership. There are communities of practice on regenerative design and regenerative business. And I think connecting to this thought network is also has always been very inspiring for me, and has built my capacity to bring back into Lush.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also personally very interested in regenerative principles and regenerative leadership. So, I mean, offline later, maybe you can tell me a bit about the books you recommend, and I can add it to the show notes as well. Um, but I think this is a perfect place to end. Thank you so much for offering such insightful advice, and I'm sure the listeners would find it very, very insightful. So, I will be continuing this conversation with Ruth Andrade in the next episode. So keep your ears and eyes open for part 2. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Sustainable Business. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at www.conference-board.org. Or if you have any thoughts to share with us, you can email us at sustainability@tcb.org.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.